are going to be taking a look at the presidential debates very closely right here on the India development debate. Not much reaction coming in from the US markets up ahead of the debate, at least as of now. But nevertheless, there is no doubt that the world's eyes are on what happens in this first round of debates. It's expected to be full of theatre, full of drama, and what does it really mean? What will it imply? Why is it important? To speak on some of these issues, I'm joined now by Michael Kugelman from the Wilson Center. Rajkamal Rao, MD of Rao Advisors, will speak with us on the show this evening. And we're also joined by Geoff Dennis, independent emerging markets commentator. Welcome to all of you and a very good evening. Good evening, my time, morning for all of you. Geoff, let me begin by getting your take. Do the markets care at all about this presidential debate, or is everyone in wait and watch mode?
I think they do care about the debate, but I think the polls have been so stable lately, with obviously a lead for Vice President Biden of around 6 to 7 points, that I suspect you would need some major shock in the debate, which of course could happen, one of them making a big mistake or appearing to be incoherent or something like that, to move the needle on the polls. So on the assumption that the debate is just a lot of back and forth, and I'm sure it gets pretty, should we say, competitive in the debate, I wouldn't expect the markets to react too much to it. What obviously will make a difference to the markets is as we run up to November the 3rd, if we do start to see these polls changing. But they've been so stable for so long that I'm not sure things necessarily will change after the debate itself tonight, but obviously we need to wait and see.
So what can really change majorly in a debate like this? And there's supposed to be 3. This is the first of it. Michael, give us perspective for our viewers over here, why these debates really matter. Do voters make up their minds after watching this debate, and what are they going to be looking out for?
Well, I mean, I think at this point, just about 4 weeks before Election Day, most voters have made a decision. Though certainly there are always those fence sitters that will pay attention to these debates, given that it's an opportunity to see the 2 candidates go head to head for the first time. There'll be 2 other occasions to do it. But I do think that most people have already decided because of the mail-in ballot option. Many Americans have already voted. They've started mailing in ballots. There's been some early voting opportunities in person. So I don't necessarily think that you're going to have huge numbers of people tuning in and waiting to make their decisions until after they see these 2 men go at it. Again, we're so late in the process, and given how polarized and polarizing the political environment is in the U.S. right now, I think that most people have a pretty good sense of what they're going to do. But indeed, I think that these debates are significant just because we'll see how these 2 men react when they're confronted, and I think that Trump will certainly go after Biden very hard. He's going to try to get Biden to crack so that he loses his temper, which has always been perceived as a vulnerability. Whereas Biden will come on very strong too. He'll go on the attack with Trump. He'll probably go after him on the 3 key issues that have made Trump more vulnerable now than at any time during his presidency. 1 is his response to the pandemic. 2 is the economic crisis that emerged after that pandemic. And 3, the racial and social tensions that have been playing out recently. And Trump is someone that does not like to be criticized, especially to his face. We'll see how he reacts. Biden, of course, can be sensitive about these things as well. And I think for some voters, if they see, we know that Trump is mercurial. We know that he's volatile. But if some voters see Biden appearing, uneasy and angry and something like that, perhaps for an independent voter, that input could be significant. But bottom line, the simple answer to your question, I think that most voters have made up their minds, and this debate and the 2 that will follow are really mere formalities, with the election just a few weeks away.
Well, there's no doubt there will be a lot of entertainment and drama. I mean, think about it. The biggest issue, Rajkamal Rao, do come in here. The biggest issue in this presidential election seems to be one of the candidates himself. Donald Trump. It's almost like a referendum on whether you like him or you don't. And to add to the mix, you've had these explosive stories from the New York Times that Trump paid only about $750 in tax in the year he got elected as president and the one after. Do you think all of this can make a dent in his voter base, or is that base completely committed?
Hi, Tamanna. Actually, I agree with both Geoff and Michael here. The only point I would make is that for Trump, at least, he is starting so low when it comes to at least how the media looks at him. This is not like a traditional campaign where it is two presidential candidates coming on stage. It is very unique in the sense that for nearly 3.5 years, every day, every hour on television, in the media, Trump has been berated, hated, vilified. I think there aren't enough adjectives and verbs in the English dictionary that have not been used by the media to vilify him. So, I mean, short of his committing a major blunder, Trump cannot really go down anymore. He's starting very low, at least in the perception of the media and the people who are holding this debate. On the flip
Mr.
side,
Rao, go down from whose perspective?
From
one minute,
people
Mr. Rao,
who
go
have already made
down
up their
anymore
minds.
when you say, who are you referring to? From whose perspective?
For people who have already made up their minds, as Michael said, right? Nothing is going to change. I mean, if people feel negatively about Trump, they'll feel negatively about Trump even after the debate, no matter what he says. And if he says something positive, they'll still feel negatively about him, because that's been that has been the effect of the drumbeat attacks by the media on him for all these years. But one unknown we have in this extremely difficult year for everybody globally, as Michael said, pandemic, race riots, and economics, and now the Supreme Court nomination, and the New York Times hit, and so many hits on him saying that he wasn't caring for military people. Despite all that, the truth really is that it is Biden who has been largely in the basement. We have never seen him come out and take questions, honest questions from honest journalists who can grill him. All the questions to Biden have been very softball all along.
Yeah. I think we found ourselves a Trump supporter on this panel, which is great.
No, it's not. It is not a question of.
That's great. I think we found ourselves a Trump supporter on this panel, and that's.
No, Tamanna, it's not a question of my being a Trump supporter. I'm just trying to be, a media savvy person, and all I'm saying is that the media has treated Biden with kid gloves and Trump with very heavy-handedness all these 3.5 years.
Okay.
And that is the point I'm trying to make. This is a media event, and that is the reason it's relevant.
Okay. All right. But the fact is, Michael, I want you to respond to that. Does all of this make a difference? I mean, some would argue that this was the exact same situation, and depends on which way you're looking at it from. The other way of looking at it is that no matter what anybody says, Trump supporters stick with him. This was a similar situation before the last presidential elections. This was what was happening in 2016. The quote-unquote liberal media was rooting for Hillary, but the results were very different. Even after the debates. So how much can you go by the polls that Geoff was referring to, or even what the media says, or what Trump supporters say, or Biden supporters say?
Well, you're absolutely right. We need to be very cautious about making any type of predictions. It's true that in 2016, Hillary Clinton was widely perceived to have performed better than President Trump on a variety of measures in the presidential debates. And she, of course, also very infamously had a lead in the polls. All the polls were saying that it was going to be a landslide victory. And we know what happened in the end. I think that we shouldn't place too much importance in these debates, not just because they're happening so soon before the election. Most people have made up their minds, but you really just don't know what is going to happen. But I think that Mr. Rao made a very important point just before about the lack of focus and scrutiny about Biden himself. It's true that Trump has been out. He's the president, so he's naturally going to get more attention. He's been out there campaigning in person, which certainly goes against the advice of his own government in terms of pandemic measures. Biden has been indeed, until relatively recently, in his basement. He's been active. He's been doing interviews and things like that, but he hasn't actually been out there to take flak, to be vulnerable, so to speak. And this time he will be. But many will also say that Biden, simply by staying quiet, can actually benefit, in the sense that Trump has been doing so many things, saying so many things that have made him vulnerable, particularly over the last few months. But indeed, tonight is key, because Biden will be in front of the cameras, and he'll have a very savvy and very skilled interviewer, Chris Wallace, who's going to be firing a lot of tough questions at Biden. He'll be firing them at Trump as well, but he'll be firing them at Biden as well, too. And we'll have to see how he responds, because he will be under the spotlight in ways that he has not been, at least not as much so as Trump has been.
Sure. Sure. So the kid gloves, if they were on, are definitely off today. I want to talk to you, Geoff, about the polls, because you talked about how the polls have been pretty steady, but the polls were all proven wrong last time around. Is there more faith in what the polls are telling you now?
Well, I don't think I'm the expert on this, and I wasn't actually saying the polls will be right. I was merely answering your question directly, which was, would the debate have much impact on the race itself? And I was merely making the point that with Biden's lead having been very stable for such a long period of time, it'd be hard to see what could happen in the debate necessarily to shift those polls. One point I would love to make about all of this, which is sort of implicit in everything the two other panelists have said, is that normally I would guess, and Michael's the expert on this, not me, but normally in a presidential debate situation like this, it would be the incumbent who wants to debate, and the president who probably, the sitting president wants to not debate, because he or she, or in this case, of course, he is looking reasonably good. This time around, I think it's the other way around. I think people worry in the Democratic Party that Biden is going to make a mess of the debate somehow and be challenged and not react well, whereas Trump probably is the one who, wants to debate. And Biden probably be best for Biden if he didn't debate. But there you go. So that has sort of turned things around a little bit. No, I'm only reading the polls that everybody else is reading. Clearly, in a lot of the marginal states, Biden has a lead, not in all of them, and of course the leads are not necessarily very significant in a number of these states. And of course, there's always the case that the polls may be wrong again, because so many people apparently will vote for Trump, but don't want to tell polling organizations they'll vote for Trump. So I'm not saying the polls are going to be right. I'm just making the point simply that I'm not sure the debate is going to move the needle much unless you see a major mistake by one or two of these candidates.
Fair enough. Give me a sense, Geoff, of what the market is looking for. Does the market, factor in a second Trump term as a positive because of the kind of vision he has for the economy or the reforms or the trade deal, etc., or do they see it as a negative? How would they respond to a Biden win? How do the markets sort of weigh? Which side do they weigh on in this contest?
Fascinating question. And the answer is I don't know. I really don't, because you will recall that on election night in 2016, the market, futures on the US market originally plunged massively and then rallied. So in principle, I think the market, you would think, would like to see a second term for Trump, because the corporate tax cuts would stay in place, the income tax cuts would stay in place, etc. The negative side would be, of course, that he will likely get even more aggressive on China. There may be more trade disputes around the world. So my view, I think, and I'm not even sure I know if this is right, my view, I think, is that if Biden were to win, I think the market will react relatively well to that, because although you may see some pulling back of those corporate tax cuts, maybe some of the personal tax cuts as well, you will end up, I think, with a Biden presidency with a much more constructive international environment, perhaps trying to resolve some of the trade disputes, not completely with China, of course, but certainly with Europe, perhaps trying to rejoin TPP. perhaps trying to rejoin the Paris Climate Change Accord. Then you've got the Iranian nuclear treaty. So I tend to believe at the margin that a Biden victory will probably long-term be seen as maybe slightly better for the markets than a Trump victory. But, you know, really tough call, frankly, really tough call.
Mr. Rao, give me a perspective of how Indian origin Americans are voting and which way. I mean, the Indian constituency has famously been pro-Democrat. You have Kamala Harris in the mix this time. But Trump has really made an effort to woo the Indian community. Do you think that this, you know, very small proportion of the population and the voting population could make a difference and could throw up a surprise?
That's a great question, Tamanna. You and I have talked about this before. I think the answer would be a resounding yes, were it not for COVID. You know, with the Howdy Modi Here rally that we covered last year, and also when Trump went to India, you saw the exuberance of at least many of the Indian supporters. That would have translated into votes here. But I think what has happened since COVID is that the mood has shifted because many Indian families are, as you know, very conservative when it comes to, and very risk averse when it comes to health. So they have a very poor opinion about how Trump has handled the COVID situation. On the economic side, many Indian families have not been impacted. Many of them, as you know, are in technology or in, or in other more white-collar professions. So they're not really quite that impacted on the economy. So for them, the main focus has been how COVID has been handled. And I think you will not be surprised, I think, if more Indians will move to Biden this time around, despite all of his efforts. Now, one last point is, I do not really think that the Kamala Harris pick has actually dented, meaning has actually helped Biden that much with the average Indian American voter, because I think bigger issues prevail.
Yeah. Michael, one would assume that COVID is the real issue on every voter's mind. I mean, 200,000 dead in the United States because of COVID, highest number of positive cases overall in the world. It's #1 on those charts. Is this going to be, in a sense, a decision on how well or how poorly the Trump administration has handled COVID?
Well, certainly that's part of it. Yes, I mean, this country has just been hit so hard. I would also highlight the economic impacts coming out of that. I mean, you've had in recent weeks some of the highest unemployment figures that this country has seen since the Great Depression, which is striking. But I think that this election will be a referendum on many issues, not just Trump's handling of the pandemic, but I think also a referendum on just on the whole Trump doctrine, which has really entailed such a revolutionizing of how presidents use their office, how they make policy, how they use institutions. Trump has probably been the most radical president that this country has seen in many, many years. And I think that this is an election that's going to come down to an issue of philosophy. I mean, does this country want to continue with the Trump way, or does it want to go back to what's tended to be the norm for much of this country's history? So it's a hugely consequential election. And certainly there are a lot of, it's going to be a referendum on many things. The pandemic is certainly one issue, but just one of many things that go beyond issues and policies, that get to the issue of, ways of just values and philosophies about governance and about the country on the whole. But the debate, bottom line, is going to be very loud and very ugly, I imagine. And I think it comes down to whether the two men will make it about themselves or about each other. If they make it about themselves, or they try to talk about their record and what they've achieved, it may be a bit more civil. But if they just go after each other and try to attack each other for the various things they want to highlight, then it could really get out of hand. I imagine we'll see a combination of both.
Michael, let me ask you also from the Indian perspective. At the end of the day, it's important to figure out which administration works best from the Indian point of view on a lot of issues. I think it's bipartisan, whether it comes to the H-1B visa issue or trade. But net, if you were to compare apples to apples, what do you think works better for India? Because the Trump-Modi relationship is pretty solid overall, though the America First policy has also been hurting. The trade issues have also been festering between India and America.
I think the bottom line is that either candidate would work very well for India. I mean, certainly I think that India may prefer to have a less mercurial, more predictable, more conventional president, given how important its relationship is with the U.S. and given that relationship is going to improve. But on the other hand, I think they're perfectly happy with the policies of this administration and are convinced of its commitment to building out its relationship with India even more. With Biden, though, it's the same. Biden is a major proponent of the relationship with India. That's been the case forevermore since he's been in the Senate when he was vice president. And I know there's been some concern that, given some things that Kamala Harris has said and some things that some Democrats have said about Kashmir and being critical of India's human rights policies and some of its domestic policies, given that there could be some tensions for the U.S.-India relationship if Biden were to win. But I don't think we should overstate those concerns. At the end of the day, regardless of whether you have Biden or Trump in the White House come January of next year, I think that the relationship with India is going to be on a level ground. It's going to be a major priority for whatever president is in place. And that's because there is very strong bipartisan support for deep partnership with India, and particularly given this U.S.-China rivalry. It continues to get worse, and both Democrats and Republicans see India as a key player in a key U.S. foreign policy goal of trying to counterbalance China. And India is viewed as that counterbalancing force.
Geoff, do you have a view on this at all, on which presidency works best from the Indian perspective?
I broadly agree with Michael. I think the thing I might add, though, is that I might tip it a little bit towards Biden being better for India, because one of the key things, obviously, Biden's going to do is to try to bring a more international aspect back to policy. Sure, obviously, as Michael said, Trump and Modi clearly get on very well, and Trump may well have a lot of support within India itself. But if part of the goal here of a Biden presidency is to try to make the country a bit more internationally focused again, by trying to rebuild some of these trade relationships by being, as I say, more international, and given that it's very, very clear that the quote-unquote conflict with China on the trade front is not going to go away just if Biden becomes president, I think Biden will very much look out for developing even stronger ties with India. And I think that will involve a general effort to stabilize trade relationships around the world. So at the margin, I would tend to think that Biden might be better for India. But, again, many factors come into that. But I think the most important thing I would say there, and Michael said it already, is that obviously the conflicts on trade with China are not going to go away. Whoever is the president, probably whoever is the president next time as well. And India obviously would be a beneficiary in terms of relative relationships to the U.S. because of that.
Mr. Rao, how do you look at that perspective from the Indian perspective completely? I mean, of course, we're all watching what plays out in the US presidential elections like the rest of the world. But do you think the relationship between India and the United States has now matured to a state where it doesn't really matter at the end of the day which administration comes to the White House?
I would agree with with both Geoff and Michael. I think we've reached a stage where the strength and the interdependence between India and America, that is so strong that I don't think it's going to matter one way or the other. The one thing I'm going to add though here is about the issue of visas, whether it's H-1Bs or it is the way international students are being treated by this administration, including some of the recent decisions that, that had egg thrown at their faces when Harvard and MIT, you remember that when they said only students with, students who are only going to online classes cannot come here. So there is a lot of, I would say, there are a lot of negative feelings about the Trump administration, about how international students are being handled. And therefore, Biden administration will definitely be perceived as being more friendly to the international student community. And in fact, perhaps even on the H-1B issue. And the other big deal here also is, the long wait for Indian professionals here who are already on H-1Bs. Tamanna, we have talked about this before. Whenever we say H-1Bs, we're always talking about, the 65,000 or the 85,000 number of visas that are issued out every year, largely for the benefit of the Indian technology firms. But often what is forgotten is the plight of the H-1B families who are already here. Some of them who wait inhuman levels of waits, like 40 or 50 years to get a green card. Nobody has done anything about it. And there is hope that a Biden administration would do something about it. And therefore, I think the Indian government's hope would be probably, towards Biden in that sense.
Well, I think the Indian government and the Indian tech sector has also utilized the COVID pandemic to sort of pivot and reduce its dependence on the H-1B issues. Over the years, H-1B has also sort of diminished on top of that list. But I think, a presidency with more stable decision making and not too many surprises and sort of erratic statements may make a difference either way. Let me not get political here, but I want to thank all of you for joining us on this very, very interesting debate. For those of you who are as excited about this as we are, you can watch it 6:30 this morning, tomorrow morning, India time. It will be streaming on ET Now as well. So do set your alarms, wake up and watch this presidential debate. If you miss it, don't worry. We'll tell you all about it all of tomorrow. We'll take a very short break at this point, but on the other side, we have the India Revival Mission. It's an exclusive with the boss of HPCL. Don't go away.